all love her. A second, please. We all love her, and she's a dynamic speaker, very insightful, and I know that she will not disappoint you. Sister Dianne is a sister of St. Agnes at Fond du Lac in Wisconsin. She served on the faculty of Catholic Theological Union from 1978 to 2014. Her curriculum vitae is lengthy, including service as president of the Catholic Theological Association of America and as the Reverend Robert Randall Distinguished Professor of Christian Culture at Providence College, Providence, Rhode Island. So Sister Dianne, thank you very much for your time and for leading this recollection. Sister will talk for about 30-40 minutes. She will for sure pay attention to the dynamic of the group, and she will lead the presentation or recollection accordingly. There will be time for us to share our reflection or comments and so on. Before we begin, let me say a prayer for us and for this day. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, let me sow pardon. Where there's doubt, let me sow faith. Where there's despair, let me give hope. Where there's darkness, let me give light. Where there's sadness, let me give joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not try to be comforted, but to comfort, not try to be understood, but to understand, not try to be loved, but to love. Because it is in giving that we receive, it is in forgiving that we are forgiven, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Sister Dianne, may I ask you to take over from this moment onward?
Fine. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be with all of you. Two things that Dianne did not include in the curriculum vitae. One of them was I have had several priests or brothers of the Sacred Heart in class at CTU, being yes. One of them. And the second one was that I know the community very well, besides this, because I served on the board for several years. So I am quite well acquainted, at least I was in the past. Things change. As was said, first of all, let me also say, a speaker who comes in to give one talk, perhaps you don't realize, is really at a great disadvantage. And the disadvantage is, I don't know what you know and what you don't know about the topic. That means that I might spend a lot of time explaining something you know all about, and I might slip over very quickly something you want to know more about. So the last part, the first part, we can't do much about. I mean, if I spend too much time, well, I'm sorry, it's a good review. If I don't spend enough time, that's where the question and answers come in. So we begin, as Dianne said, with a comment, a kind of quotation, if you will, of one of the paragraphs in the Holy Father's writings. And this is paragraph 120, I believe, in Gaudium, Evangelii Gaudium. And what it says is, by virtue of baptism, we are all missionary disciples. Now, there are three very important words in that very short statement. The first one is baptism. I invite you to think about for a moment memorial cards that I'm sure we all have that were given to us at the death of somebody we knew and or loved very much. Several years ago, I was responsible for arranging a memorial card for a very dear friend. And it became very clear to me, I had never seen a memorial card that mentioned when the person was baptized, when they were born, when they died, if it was a member of a religious community, when they made profession, if it was somebody who was ordained, the day of or the anniversary or the day of ordination, never baptism. And we know there will be no profession if there's no baptism. There will be no ordination if there's no baptism. And maybe it is because most of us really don't remember our baptism. And since I said this, one other person I knew, some of you, again, who knew CTU, Kevin McClone teaches pastoral counseling at CTU. And he was married to a lovely Chinese woman, Grace, who is now deceased. And Grace was a convert. I can't remember, I think they met at school. He had been with the Capuchins, but they met at CTU. And she was a new convert. And that meant that her baptism was a significant turning point in her life, which unfortunately, it's not for many of us, if not most of us. And some of us may not even know when we were baptized. We don't even remember. We remember our birthday, but not our baptism day. And that is unfortunate because that's the ticket that opens up all the doors for us in the church. And without it, there are no doors open. All right. So when the Holy Father says it is by virtue of baptism, all right, that's what we're talking about. That we are missionary disciples, two very important words. First of all, disciple is the noun, missionary is the adjective, the defining adjective. A disciple is one who learns. A disciple is one who learns from a master, all right? And I realize that's gender-specific language, but normally in certain societies in the ancient world, the master was a male. But the disciple learns from the master, and that's very, very important. We learn about what the master cherishes, and we learn about how the master lives, and we pattern our lives after the master. But it's a special kind of disciple. It is a missionary disciple. And again, by definition, missionary disciple might be one who hugs the ideal and the message of the master because it focuses on us. But missionary does not focus on us. Missionary is outgoing. So, you know, the missionaries are not simply those who go to foreign languages. Many of us still operate out of a pre-Vatican Council language because we learned it when we were young and we never learned anything new as we grew older, which is unfortunate. But a missionary disciple is one who has first learned from the master, who of course is Jesus, and then goes out of oneself in order to bring the message of Jesus that the disciple has learned to others. It's very simple. The only thing that we have to do is show others what Jesus is all about. It's that simple and that difficult. So when he says that we are all, by virtue of baptism, missionary disciples, once again, pre-Vatican theology concentrated on the disciples or the missionaries or the ministers who were members of religious community or ordained, not the lay people. And I was fortunate enough to remember the excitement after the Second Vatican Council. And one of the four defining characteristics of the Second Vatican Council was that this is a church of the laity, not just a church for the laity, a church of the laity. All right, and the laity by virtue of baptism, like the rest of us who may be members of a religious community and or ordained, that makes us no better and no more involved in the ministry of the church than the lay people are. And the Second Vatican Council was in the early 60s. That's 60 years ago. And someplace along the line, many of us are still operating out of pre-Vatican categories. So in a certain sense, I'm not saying that those of you who are ordained or members of a religious community can now leave because the talk is really not for you. But in very different ways, the talk is for us all because of the importance of what baptism means in our life. Now, I want to read a couple of passages from the New Testament. I got 3 passages from the New Testament I want to read. One of them is from Romans, one of them is from Ephesians, and one of them is from 1 Corinthians. Now we know Romans and 1 Corinthians are letters of Paul, who was a great missionary and a layman. All right, just like Jesus was not ordained, he was a layman. He was not a priest of ancient Israel, he was a layman. And these particular readings talk about ministry. And that word is very common in religious communities, and perhaps in those who work for religious communities, as the rest of you people work for the community. But I heard that when I listened to the talking and somebody said that, you know, there might be about 100 people, I thought, where do they have all these people? And of course, I became aware listening to the conversation that they're not limited to Sacred Heart School of Theology. All right. And they're not limited to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but they are all over the United States. And I'm presuming, I don't know if you have any people of other countries who are listening to this, but I know that your community is in other countries. So you also have people working with and for you in these other countries. So the word ministry belongs to all of us by virtue of baptism. The word minister belongs to all of us by virtue of baptism. You may not want to use the word, but you are one. You are. If you are involved, somehow involved in religious work, you are a minister. The question is, what's religious work? And if we listen to these passages, the first one is from Romans chapter 12, beginning with verse 7. Listen to how he defines, he uses different language, but this is what we're talking about. Missionary disciples. Verse 12, beginning with chapter 12, beginning with verse 7. 6. We have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. We have gifts given according to the grace, which differ according to the grace given us. Prophecy. Prophecy does not look into the future. A prophet is not somebody who looks into the future. There's another biblical word for that, soothsayer sometimes. A prophet is one who looks into the present. A prophet reads what's going on in the present and calls us to be more faithful. There's an edge to a prophet. So what are they? We have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Prophecy in proportion to faith. Now, I am sure that there are many of you who have insight into the present, into what's going on in the church and in the world. That's a kind of, at least it's the beginning of prophetic insight. Ministry in ministering. Now, what does that mean? Anybody, as far as I'm concerned, anybody who's in charge of technology, God bless you. You are a minister. You are serving those of us who are idiots when it comes to technology. That's a service. And we all know in this world, that service is essential. You get nowhere in this world today if you don't know how to deal with technology. And you've got people who are hired exclusively to be responsible for technology. They are serving us so that we can do the service that we have been called to. So ministry in ministering, the teacher in teaching. That's an obvious one. We know that so easily, but sometimes we know teaching in a very narrow context. In it, the exhorter in exhorting. When you give advice, that's exhortation. Sometimes exhortation has a very negative connotation. It means we're really lording it over. But when you give advice, that's exhortation. And I'm sure there are a lot of people. I'm sure Dianne is not the only one who gives advice. The question is whether or not anybody listens to it. That's another issue. But giving the advice is exhortation. The giver in generosity. I like that because it's not what we normally think ministry is. The giver in generosity. This is chapter 12 of Romans. The leader in diligence. Notice diligence is what he says. The compassionate in cheerfulness. These are gifts given to us that enable us to serve. A minister is one who serves. And please look at what you do in the community that you are part of. The immediate community where you work, the community that's from all different parts of the country. But look at what you do. How do you make the work of other people easier? That's extraordinary service. We may not think janitorial work is ministry. We all know what happens if there is no janitor. And in a certain sense, things do not move well. I should have said this at the beginning. Where I live right now, they're checking the fire alarm system. So if you hear, it sounds like a fire alarm, they're just checking it. But these men who are going all over the house are serving us. I wonder if they understand that as ministry, which of course it is. They are doing a service to us. Now that's Romans. The other passage another passage I want us to think about for just a moment is 1 Corinthians, the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 12. The whole chapter is about spiritual gifts. Now, concerning spiritual gifts, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. This is Paul. I could use those words myself. You know that when you were pagans, you were enticed and led astray to idols that could not speak. Therefore, I want you to understand that no one speaking by the Spirit of God ever says Jesus be cursed. And no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Spirit of God. That's the context. He's talking to people who were originally pagans. In no way am I suggesting that you were originally pagans, but perhaps you people who are not members of religious communities get this all the time. Not that we are necessarily always faithful to it, but we get the language about ministry all the time. You may not, or you may. Here's where I might be hitting the hammer over and over again, and I don't have to. But frequently, you don't see what you do as ministry, as missionary discipleship. He goes on, there are a variety of gifts, but the same Spirit And there are varieties of services, but the same Lord. And there are variety of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. Again, I invite you to think about what you do in this institution, broader institution, what you do, how what you do makes the institution function neatly, makes it function successfully. The people who may do nothing but distribute the mail, how essential mail is. So you are serving, making a very significant contribution to the good working of the institution. I want to say this, and I want to emphasize, never underestimate the importance of what you do. It is important for the service of the whole. He goes on. To one is given through the Spirit the utterance of wisdom. Now, wisdom is in a certain sense, a human characteristic, which we frequently ascribe to the elderly. But there's a wonderful proverb that says, there's no fool like an old fool, which means, of course, we're supposed to get wisdom through life, through living of life, through living life successfully. And the one who does not learn from the experiences of life is a fool. And that's why if you get an elderly person who has not learned from life, and I'm not talking about that they did not have the physical ability. We're talking about people. We don't always learn from life, you and I don't. We don't always learn from our mistakes, you and I don't. And if that's common, then the scriptures would say that we are fools. But think about wisdom. Again, think about what you do, what you contribute. And the more you contribute it, the better you get at it. And the better you get at it, the better the whole organization functions. To another, the utterance of knowledge. I would not know how to begin to check the fire drills, or I wouldn't know how to. Also, we're replacing light bulbs for LED light bulbs. Okay. I know how to replace a light bulb, but I don't know how to fix an electrical appliance. And what would we do without the people who carry the ladders around the school, fixing all the electrical appliances? That is service to the whole. To another, faith by the same Spirit. To another, gifts of healing. And there are a lot of ways of healing. Comforting people who are suffering great loss. Encouraging people who are afraid. And we do this not only with the students, if we're talking about a school, with our colleagues. We encourage, we comfort them. And the reason that we understand this, we'll talk about what makes all of this ministry, but don't ever underestimate how important that is for the working of the school or any other ministerial site you're involved in. To another, working of miracles. And again, don't limit, what your understanding of miracle to something that is outside of nature. I think the real miracles are sometimes what happens inside of nature. To another, prophecy. There, that word is again that he uses. To another, discernment of spirits. To another, a variety kinds of tongues. To another, the interpretation of tongues. He lists all of these things, some of which some of us have received. but we don't think of them as gifts from the Spirit that can be used as ministerial gifts, because we may not think that we are involved in ministry. The priests and religious are involved in ministry. They may be involved in churchy ministry, but there's more ministry than churchy. By that I mean sacramental ministry. I teach theology. Well, obviously, that's ministry. Well, what if I taught math? Well, that's not ministry, that's math. Well, that's wrong. It's the teaching that's ministry. It's not the content of the teaching, because what we're doing in teaching, we are opening the minds of others for any number of reasons, to understand and appreciate the beauty of nature, in order to enable them to live a profitable life. It's what we do to the minds and the hearts of people that's teaching. All you got to do, if it's content, give them a book. Sometimes the author of a book is much better in explaining the content than the teacher is. But the issue is opening up the minds, encouraging people to think in new ways. That's what teaching is all about. And sometimes it's new ways in the head, and sometimes it's new ways with the hands. Teaching, my father was a magnificent teacher. My father was an automotive engineer. Now that sounds pretty sophisticated. When I was a kid, we called that grease monkey. My father was a truck mechanic, and he knew, there was nothing about a large truck that my father did not know. All right, and he taught me some things. You know, you don't teach your kid too many things because they may try to do it. But you teach with your hands as well, not just with the head. That's the second passage. And the third passage is from Ephesians. Now it's called Paul's letter to the Ephesians, but there's a lot of question whether or not it was really Paul who wrote it, but it's good stuff. It's chapter 4, beginning with verse 11. Actually, I want to begin with verse 10. He who descended is the same one who ascended far above all the heavens, so that he might fill all things. Of course, we're talking about Jesus. The gifts he gave were that some would be apostles. Apostle is a teacher. Some would be apostles. Some prophets. Some evangelists. Evangelist is simply somebody who teaches what it means, what the reign of God is all about. And that's what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about what the reign of God is all about. I'll get to that a little bit more in a moment. Some pastors, and sometimes the one in charge is not the primary pastor. Those of you who know CTU will know who I'm talking about. In the past, for a long time, we had a wonderful African-American woman, Harrietta Holloway, who was at the front desk. If you ever called CTU, she's the one that would answer the phone, and she always identified us as Catholical Union. There was part of the word she always skipped. Catholical Union. Anybody who knew Harrietta knew Catholical Communion. I would be willing to bet she was the primary pastoral minister in that school. And we had some wonderful pastoral ministry teachers. We had good administration, but students always talked to Harrietta. Many faculty talked to Harrietta. I really think in those years, she was the primary pastoral minister of that institution, which is a wonderful institution when it comes to pastoral ministry. But she was the primary one. And I'd be willing to bet she never saw herself like that. And if you would tell her that today, she wouldn't know what you're talking about. So when we talk about pastors, it's not necessarily the one who sits in the big chair. In a certain sense, we should all be pastors to each other, comforting, encouraging, challenging, sometimes exhorting, other times maybe pointing out error. And there are ways of doing it in a pastoral way. You make a mistake with machinery, don't think that the machinists don't realize you're the one that made the mistake, and now they got to clean it up. It's how they do it that is pastoral. It's not that they do it, it's how we do everything that is pastoral. So it goes on. Apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers to equip the saints. Frequently, Paul referred to those who are part of the church saints. So again, it's a broader understanding of saint, not simply somebody that has a halo. For building up the body of Christ. Now, that in a certain sense, very briefly, I think, is what the Holy Father is saying when he says, by virtue of baptism, we are all missionary disciples. Whatever it is we do, whether it gets the flashy headlines and the big bucks or not, whether you're full-time or part-time, whether you're in charge or you're ancillary, whatever we do anywhere must be seen as service to others. And the reason it can be or must be seen as service to others, that it builds up the body of Christ, or to use another metaphor, the reign of God. The reign of God or the kingdom of God is not something that happens after we die. Funeral is something that happens after we die, not the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God, read the Gospels, the kingdom of God is in your midst. The kingdom of God or the reign of God means we live in the world in a different way than the way certain elements in our society encourage us to live. For example, without getting partisan, I think it is disgraceful and so unfortunate the way the Congress works in this country. And not just the Congress, political partisans, and we all are. It is terrible. In a certain sense, all you've got to do is watch the ads for the primary election. Some ads say absolutely nothing about what somebody does or promises to do. They point out, they call up their opponents liars. And it seems that sometimes in the Congress, you will be rejected by your identified political party if you do not speak negative against the opposition. You've got to stand up, and if you're Republican, criticize in a way that would cut me to the core. Criticize the Democrats. And if you're Democrat, stand up and criticize the Republicans and call them names. Donald Trump is not the only one that calls the opposition names. He may have started it. He's got some, very interesting names, but he's not the only one who does that. And in fact, there have been times when I know I should not enter into a political conversation because I could be as vile as anyone else. There is a joke in my family. I have one sibling who is a sister, 2.5 years my senior. And the joke in my family is I will crawl to the polls to vote simply to cast out or to neutralize her vote. And so that regardless of who's elected, nobody can blame the Bergants because we canceled out each other's vote. Now, in a certain sense, I never speak politics to my sister because I realize there is something more important than correcting her politics. And that is the relationship I have with my sister is more important than political differences, because I know that we will not only disagree, we will probably do it not in a way that is ladylike to say nothing about Christians. So the issue, I use that as an example of how when we act like that, we have slipped right into the kind of world that is operative in our world today, the kind of vicious antagonism about somebody who has a different point of view. Everybody has the right to have a different point of view, and it is so unfortunate that we do not feel safe to express our point of view. Now, if we were really Christian, if we were really building up the reign of God, which means that we are living in this contentious world in a different way, in a way of accepting differences, that's the reign of God. The reign of God is not winning a political battle. The reign of God is accepting differences. The reign of God is realizing, as disappointed as you might be in the weather, so there's a little bit of snow, I suggest you go out and live in California, or maybe you are in California. In a certain sense, you know, we don't suffer. I'm in Fond du Lac, which is Wisconsin. We don't suffer from, we have not been suffering as other people have suffered with the weather. Losing their homes, where if it doesn't slide down the hill, it's swept away by the water, whether that be the East Coast or the West Coast. So in a certain sense, how fortunate we are. And maybe instead of complaining, and what does the weather doing for us? It inconveniences us. I met somebody once who insisted there is no such thing as bad weather. Bad weather is weather that inconveniences us. Bad weather, we call it bad weather because we're standing on the corner waiting for the bus, and the bus is late because the bus does not elevate above the snow and skim across it and enable us to keep our schedule. So bad weather in our minds is really not bad. It inconveniences us. That's a little bit arrogant, I think. Now I'm exaggerating this, but I'm saying we live in the world, and we must live in a world realizing there is a better way of living in this world, that we can be our better self without always complaining or always demanding. Or another way of saying it, bite your tongue instead of biting at somebody else. That's the reign of God. The reign of God has very little to do with how many communions are distributed at Mass. A friend of mine gave me a TED, what do they call those? On YouTube. It was a TED presentation. A priest friend of hers, an elderly man, preaching after the COVID isolation and shutdown was opened up. And he said that people come to me and say, you know, now the people, after COVID, will the people be coming back to church? And he said, it's the wrong question. The question is, after COVID, will the church now come back to the people? That's the reign of God. For us who go to church and identify ourselves as Christians, the issue is not that we stay in our church and take care of our spiritual needs, but having taken care of our spiritual needs, we go out of church and serve others. At the end of Mass, instead of go in peace, they ought to say, now get out there and do something. That's what the go in peace means. But it's so homogenized that we miss the punch there. It really means get out there and change the world. Now go back to where you work and make it better than it was yesterday. Make it better. That's the reign of God. And that, friends, is our privilege and responsibility by virtue of baptism. Not by profession, not by ordination, and not simply because you work in or for a religious organization. It's baptism that gives us the responsibility and the privilege. We're not just cleaning up the air, though we should be doing that. we're not just remodeling a building, though we might have to do that. We have been called to transform the world. Every single one of us is called to transform the world. Don't forget, the one we follow was simply a carpenter in Israel, which was a nothing, nobody, unimportant nation in the ancient Near Eastern world. And it was not a free country. They were oppressed by the Romans. They lived under Roman oppression. So who was he? We even find that in the scriptures. Who is this man? Can anything come out of Nazareth or Galilee? Or can anything come out of Israel? Anything good? Or else they would say, we know who he is. He's the carpenter's son, which means, he was not the son of the governor. He was not the son of the high priest. He was a carpenter's son. Who was he? That's the one we follow because we know who he was and who he is. And I want to end with this. Don't ever minimize what you can do to serve others. It is significantly important. You never know what your smile will do for somebody who is suffering great consternation. Your smile, your good words, your good morning, your pat on the back, as simple as that. That's establishing the reign of God. That's making that person important enough and letting them know they are important enough. So, by virtue of your baptism, you are missionary disciples. And now what are you doing about it? That's a little over half an hour.
Thank you very much, Sister Dianne, and you give us so much to think about our mission and our responsibility as baptized Christians. And you also reminded us of the importance of our ministry, that little things that we do can be extraordinary, can be life transforming. And so now I would invite our participants to share your thoughts, comments. If you have any questions that you would like to ask Sister Dianne, now is the time to do so. So I asked Sister Kathleen to give us some instructions, if you don't mind, Sister Kathleen.
Certainly. In order to raise your hand, you're going to look for a tool called Reactions. If you're on a computer or a laptop, the tools are across the bottom and you will find Reactions. When you click on that, one of the choices will be Raise Hands. If you're on a phone or a tablet, you will need to tap the screen to make the tools come up and look around the edges for Reactions. And again, look for Raise Hand, and that will help us to find you.
Questions, observations, comments? If they are criticisms, just say it nice.
Okay, we have
Steve Kepke.
You got to unmute yourself, Steve.
Yes.
If you're on, Steve. Can you unmute it for her?
I'm sending an, okay.
I think I got it now.
All right, good, yes.
Sister, I doubt you remember me, but you taught me at CTU nearly 40 years ago. And you still have the same energy and enthusiasm today as you did then, which I think is just remarkable. And just wanting you, I appreciate your words very much. And thank you for this morning.
Thank you very much. May I just say, a little aside, at CTU, when you would get a class list, you know, I always use that as my grade list. And I had little signs, you know, I mean, I would put down the grade that they had for their paper, their test or something, and then the final grade. But I also had little signals if they had to do it over, if they were late, and I had all these things. And I've never thrown those away. I can give an account, you fellas, for every grade I ever got at CTU. Several years ago, Mark Francis, who was a Viatorian, was in my very first class, and he was just a first-year student. And then years later, he came to the faculty as a liturgy professor, and then years later, he applied to be president, which he eventually was. But when he came to interview, I went into my file, and I have them. They're all, in order. I went into my file, and I pulled out that grade list, and I took it to the interview, and I said, guess what I have here? Now, I could do that with Mark because he was a good student. So, but it was a big joke that I have kept all my grades. So if you want, it's always nice if you have to write a letter of recommendation. You got the evidence right there. But it's also good if you want to frighten somebody. Okay, we have a couple of hands.
Okay, Deacon Ted.
There we go. Sister, Father David Zakowski told me that I would very much enjoy this. He went down for prison ministry so I could be here. So thank you very much. Your message is going to change some things for me and build up especially with baptism interviews every couple of months. I want to thank you. I know that we all, it's good to steal other people's message, and I'll very much do that today.
Good.
So,
It's free.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, there's just got a hand up. I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. I know it's Andrew, but it's not English.
Andre.
Andre, so that's good. Okay, thank you.
Sister, thank you for your message. It was very beautiful and powerful. I will just mention two things that I will remember forever, what you said, that the relationship with my sister and brother is more important than the political stand. It's very helpful in our communities, believe me. And it's true, how we love each other is more important than even political stand. And second thing, what you said, that as a pastor at St. Martin of Tours here in Franklin, Wisconsin, we always use this phrase that when the people will go back to the church, when they will come back to us. But I like what you said. When are we going to meet them then? When are we going to them after COVID? Thank you for this. This is what really our founder, Father Dehonian, was saying a long time ago, 100 years ago about it. And we are still hesitating.
That's right. And that's what the Holy Father says all the time. Francis is always saying that. He even says you should smell like the people. And smell like the sheep.
Thank you, sister, and God bless you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anyone else? I don't see anybody. John.
First, thank you very much, Dianne. I always feel blessed when we're able to hear you and be with us. But a question, sometimes I try to talk this way about what you're doing is ministry. And sometimes people say, well, that cheapens it. That what I'm doing is just ordinary kind of stuff. Why do you have to call that ministry? I don't know what to I don't know what to say to that.
The issue is why they do it. I think that it's a question of service, or are we doing it simply for to make a buck?
Oh, so the intentionality, it's like
I think, yeah, and isn't that what life is all about? I mean, why do we do what we do?
Yes. Okay.
I mean, and some people do it without any religious sentiment, but they know that. Again, I want to think of my father, and how my father interacted with the people that when where he worked, and he was a very generous man. I mean, whether he made his good intention in the morning is beside the point. He was a generous man because he learned that you help other people because they are worthwhile. Now, on the one hand, that might not seem religious, and I don't think it has to always sound religious.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and I, you know, in a certain sense, if people don't like that we use religious or theological language, use different language. Ask somebody who says, you know, I'm just doing my job, then say, but your job helps other people, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And maybe not immediately. And that's why I say, you know, people who distribute the mail, the school could not go on if you didn't answer your mail or if you didn't answer the telephone. I mean, you're not operating in a hermitage. You're operating in a public. And so other people have to make they may not be running, you know, the tractor, but they're keeping the tractor oiled so that somebody else can run the tractor.
When we're talking about the lady at the desk at CTU, Henrietta,
Yeah,
yeah, you know, I was thinking she probably wasn't making the intention of
no,
this, but she just wanted to do the loving thing.
exactly, exactly.
And just maybe just to help people be aware that that's what they're doing, and that's
That's right.
ministry. Yeah.
And she could listen to the students
Yeah.
moan in a way professors they wouldn't moan in front of professors. They might do it behind the professor's back, but they wouldn't moan, you know. And you're right. I mean, if you would ever say that to her, she'd say no. Well, and that's fine if she doesn't use theological language. That's all theology is anyway. Theology is simply language, trying to understand what does it mean to be a decent human being and not a selfish human being. And even the non-religious know the difference.
Thank you, Dianne.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Lynn.
Hi, sister. Thank you for your talk today. I'm kind of reflecting on what you started and how you opened, where you said about baptism opens the doors to the church. I am wondering, with some of the new Christian churches right now, they do not baptize babies. They are waiting. And I've got some family members that are part of these churches, and I'm wondering, how do we speak to that? Because I'm really struggling with them waiting until the child is ready or letting them come to God on their own. And so they're baptizing them when the child thinks it's appropriate. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think there are two things we should not confuse. One of them is being officially a member of a group, which is what baptism does for us. We become officially a member of the Christian community, however you want to define Christian community. And the other one is somehow coming to an insight about what life is all about and how we are not here simply to get everything we can get out of it. Now, because you become a member of the church does not mean that you cease being somebody who wants to get everything you can out of life. Just because you are a member does not mean you're a good member, right? And I think sometimes, you know, we think that you must be baptized in order to get to heaven. Well, boy, that eliminates whole swaths of people in the world, generations back. That takes care of the Jews, that takes care of the Muslims, that takes care of the Sikhs, that takes care of most Eastern religions, you know, and in a certain sense, the theologians will say today, now you got to say it in certain circles, because some people who are not aware of developments in religion, in theology. I want to use the word theology, because theology is the way we understand what it means to be good. And some people who learned a certain way and have never changed, not their own fault either. I blame no one for that. They have not had the opportunity that many of us have had of learning new insights into theology in the same way as in society, we learn different ways of communicating. And we used to communicate simply with smoke signals. And now we communicate electronically, and we learn all of that, as life goes on. All right, so some people never had the opportunity to learn theology, but they learned in the family, they learned in the neighborhood, they learned in society that you have to learn how to live with other people. And the more you learn how the dance of living goes, the happier you will be, and the more fulfilled you will be. And that's an inner desire in every single person. Societies that we belong to simply tell us what's going to make us happy. And that's why different groups find their happiness in different ways, because the society, in a certain sense, it informs you. I can remember my mother saying, "Eat this, you'll like it." And she said that when I knew I wasn't going to like it. All right. But we learned certain things, we learn what it means to be a good girl, or what it means to be a good boy, what it means to be an acceptable adult. And if we live in accord with what we believe are the standards of being a genuine, decent human being, that's the key to salvation, not the baptismal gown. The baptismal gown says we belong to a group that should make it easier for us. It doesn't always, but should make it easier for us. That answers for us some of those questions we cannot answer for ourselves. That years ago, that movie and that song, "What's It All About, Alfie?" That is a fundamental religious question, regardless of how Alfie answered it. What's it all about? What is life all about? So what do you say to people who have made a decision either not to have their children baptized and wait for the child, who is then maybe as a teenager or an adult, to choose, do I want to be baptized? Do I want to be Christian? We don't do that with, you decide when you're 17 whether or not you want to be a citizen of the United States. And in the meantime, you cannot enjoy the privileges of being a citizen. We never do that, but we do that with the church and religion sometimes. But then I'm in no position to find fault with people who genuinely believe that's the best way to go. And my presumption is, if people believe that's the best way to go, I am presuming they want to raise their children to be decent citizens of the country, of the society. And I leave to you to decide whether or not it's your place to tell them they're wrong. To say
You're
that,
right, yeah. Thank you.
exactly, and to say that I don't understand it that way, that's perfectly fine. Or I wouldn't raise my children that way. Well, they're not your children. That's right. And then you decide what you want to say to them. But I think that you have to respect. Are those kids going to go to hell? That's not what that's not the decision to go to hell. Is to you make that decision. I want nothing to do with God. I mean, that's the decision, not that you break a rule or not that you don't follow the protocol. But it's a very touchy thing. Very touchy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sister Dianne, I would like to know that a lot of people left messages thanking you, and they mentioned how your message really spoke to them. So thank you, sister.
Thank you.
It is the emphasis of our provincial administration to emphasize the importance of the ministry of the laity. And so collaboration with the laity is one of the topics of our provincial chapter. So we'll do our best just to make sure that this is not only the ministry of the priest. What you do is not only the ministry of the priest of the Sacred Heart, but it's your ministry as well, that you take ownership in what you do. And so the the provincial council is working on that with you. And so thank you very much for what you do. And Sister Dianne, we have more than about 600 collaborators working
Oh, my goodness.
with us. And so that's it's a great ministry. I don't think the priest of the Sacred Heart can exist without our collaborators.
That's right.
That's
That's right.
So that's always our emphasis, and we that's a point we go forward with. So thank you, sister, for your presentation, for your recollection. You have given us much to think about the importance of what we do daily. Small things, great things, but everything that we do can be transformative. Thank you, our participants, for your ministry, for taking your time just to celebrate our time together and to reflect on what we do and who we are as Christians, as baptized Christians, or as Christians, or as who we are. Sister, you mentioned earlier that you still keep the names and grades of our students. Do you remember what I got in the Psalms and Wisdom Literature class?
Do you want me to look it up?
I would be very interested. Well, but thank you, sister. And earlier, Deacon Ted mentioned Father David Sakowski, and Father David Sakowski is a student of Sister Dianne, and I'm also her student as well. And so thank you very much, sister, once again. And I wish all of you a very blessed and very inspiring Thursday afternoon or Thursday. So thank you so much. Until next time.
It's good to be with you. Thank you, everybody, for being so kind.
Thank you.